6 months. It had been 6 months of suspicion, frustration, and the gnawing feeling that something was terribly wrong. At first, I thought it was just the stress of life creeping into our marriage. The late nights at the office, the quiet dinners where we hardly spoke, the sudden distance between us, it was easy to dismiss at first. But as the weeks dragged on, those little moments began to pile up. The vague excuses, the strange texts that seemed to disappear the second she glanced at them, the way she started spending more time at the gym, or with her friends from work. I remember the first time I really started noticing something. It was a Saturday night. We were supposed to go to dinner together. But when I texted her, she said she had to stay late at the office, working on a presentation. We'd been married for 5 years, and up until then, she'd never put work before us, not like this. There had always been a balance. But that night, I found myself sitting at the dinner table alone, staring at my phone. I tried to call her, but it went straight to voicemail. I could feel something in the pit of my stomach, a cold, heavy dread. I didn't say anything that night. I didn't ask her about it when she finally came home hours later, tired but with a strange look in her eyes, as if she had been somewhere else, physically and emotionally. I told myself it was nothing. That I was being paranoid. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. Days passed, and I started noticing other things, the way her phone buzzed constantly with notifications, how she'd quickly swipe it away whenever I walked into the room, how she'd always forget her phone at home when she went out. I should have confronted her, I know that now. But I didn't want to look like the jealous, insecure husband. I wanted to trust her. I had to trust her. Then one afternoon, I found the first clue. It was a simple thing, something small, but it felt like a bomb going off in my chest. It was a crumpled receipt, tucked in the pocket of a jacket she'd left hanging in the closet. It was for a nightclub, one I'd never heard of before. The date was last Saturday, the same night she'd worked late. My heart skipped a beat as I studied it. The name on the receipt didn't mean anything to me. But the amount, the time it was paid, this was no dinner out with coworkers. This was something different. I told myself I was being ridiculous. It was probably nothing. Maybe she had gone out with a friend, and the receipt just got mixed up. But when I checked her calendar later, I saw that she'd blocked off a whole evening a few days ago with the title, Club Night with John. John. The name sounded familiar, but I couldn't quite place it. I didn't want to believe it, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized that John wasn't just a name on a calendar. He was someone she had been seeing. Someone she had been hiding from me. I tried to ignore it at first, thinking it was a coincidence. Maybe it wasn't as serious as it seemed. But the feeling in my gut, dark and cold, told me otherwise. Over the next few days, I kept watching her, waiting for any sign that would confirm my worst fears. The silence between us grew. She didn't notice it, or maybe she did but didn't care. She went about her days with a strange indifference, and I became more and more obsessed. I couldn't let it go. I had to know. It was a Thursday afternoon when I finally snapped. I had tracked her phone location earlier that day and saw that she was at the club. That same club from the receipt. The one she had been working late for. My heart raced as I grabbed my keys and headed out the door. I knew what I had to do, but I wasn't prepared for what I would find when I got there. I pulled up to the club and parked a few blocks away. I didn't want her to see my car, but I needed to see with my own eyes what was going on. The neon lights of the club were blinding in the darkness, and the bass from inside rumbled in my chest. I couldn't stop my hands from shaking as I approached the entrance, trying to remain calm, trying to convince myself that this wasn't as bad as I thought. I spotted her almost immediately. She was standing near the bar, talking to a man, John, I assumed. He was tall, with dark hair and a wide grin. He looked like trouble. She smiled at him the way she used to smile at me, carefree, full of excitement. I watched them from the corner of the room, feeling my stomach turn as I saw the way he touched her arm, the way she leaned in closer to him. I knew in that moment that it wasn't just a fling. This was something real. Something that had been building behind my back. I couldn't stay there. I couldn't watch anymore. My mind was racing, and my chest felt tight with rage. I turned on my heel and walked out of the club, the door slamming behind me. As I drove home, I couldn't stop thinking about the betrayal. How could she do this? How could she betray me like this, after everything we had been through? My heart felt hollow, empty. I wanted to scream, to shout, to lash out at her, but I knew I had to be careful. I couldn't let her know I knew. Not yet. The truth was clear now. She had been seeing someone else for months. But it wasn't just the affair that hurt. It was the lies, the deception. It was the fact that she had been living a double life, and I had been too blind to see it. And I knew, deep down, that I was never going to be able to look at her the same way again. She had destroyed everything. And now, it was time for me to make her pay. But I had to be smart about it. I couldn't let emotion cloud my judgment. I had to plan my revenge carefully. And when the time was right, she would feel the consequences of what she had done. I just had to figure out how. The realization hit me like a tidal wave. My wife, the woman I had loved and trusted, had been seeing another man behind my back for months. And what made it worse was the fact that I had been completely blind to it, trusting her when I should have been questioning everything. I could feel my anger swelling with every thought, each one more intense than the last. But as much as I wanted to scream and break everything in my path, I knew I couldn't let my emotions take over. I had to be calculated, methodical. This was no longer about catching her in the act or confronting her about her infidelity. This was about revenge, and revenge was a dish best served cold. I spent the next several days watching her closely, waiting for any more signs of her lies. I kept a distance, though. I didn't want her to know I was onto her. I started to piece together her movements, her new habits, her work nights, her sudden late meetings that always ended with her phone tucked away the moment she walked in the door. It was a game now, a twisted chess match. And I was ready to make my move. The first part of my plan was easy. I needed to find out everything about this man, John. I had to understand what I was up against. He wasn't just a man she had an affair with, he was a threat, someone who had wormed his way into my life and, through his manipulation, taken what was mine. I spent hours on the internet, scouring social media and public records for anything that could give me an edge. His name popped up on various websites, mostly connected to his job as the owner of a high-end nightclub. The more I dug, the more I learned. John was exactly the type of man I despised. He had a reputation for playing dirty. The nightclub he ran was known for being a front for illicit activities, money laundering, illegal gambling, and other shady dealings that even I, with my knowledge of the business world, could recognize. It wasn't just a club, it was a hub for criminals. I knew right then that I could use this against him. The question was how. How could I bring him down, make him feel the weight of his actions, while ensuring my wife would see the consequences of her betrayal? The answer came to me slowly over the course of the next few nights. I had to get close to John. I had to get inside his world, understand his every move, and find a way to turn his own crimes against him. I wasn't going to just make him suffer, I was going to destroy his life in a way he would never expect. The first step was infiltrating his club. It was a high-end, exclusive establishment that catered to the rich and famous, the kind of place I never would have set foot in before. But now, I had a reason. I knew I couldn't just waltz in and hope to get any information. I had to blend in, become part of the scene. I spent a few nights hanging around the club, watching from the shadows, getting a feel for the place. It wasn't hard to blend in with the crowd. I dressed well, kept to myself, and slowly started to talk to people. I didn't want to draw attention to myself, so I took a backseat approach, letting people come to me instead of the other way around. The more I observed, the more I realized just how dirty everything was. The people who came and went from that club were not the types you invited to family dinners. They were criminals, con artists, people who lived on the edge. But there was one thing they all had in common: they were afraid of John. It wasn't just his wealth or his charm, it was his power. He had connections, and those connections ran deep. The more I heard, the more I understood why he had been able to keep my wife under his spell. It wasn't just a fling for her, it was part of a larger, more dangerous game. I kept my distance from John at first, letting the rumors and whispers swirl around him. But I knew I had to get closer. I needed a way in, something that would give me leverage. I started to plant little seeds of doubt, just enough to make people start talking. I found out that John had been involved in a number of shady deals, money laundering, drug trafficking, and even connections to some organized crime syndicates. I knew that if I could expose this, it would bring him down. But I needed proof. The next step was risky. I started befriending some of the employees at the club, working my way into their trust. It wasn't easy, most of them were just trying to make a living, and they were wary of anyone who seemed too interested in the club's inner workings. But I played the part. I kept my intentions hidden, pretending to be a regular guy just enjoying the nightlife. I bought drinks, gave generous tips, and kept the conversations casual. Little by little, the employees started to open up. And that's when I heard the real dirt. One of the bartenders let slip that John was more than just the owner of the club. He was involved in a much larger operation, one that was under investigation by the authorities. Apparently, he had been skimming money from the club's legitimate business and funneling it into an underground network. The best part? John thought he was untouchable. He thought his connections would keep him safe. I smiled to myself as I absorbed this information. I had him. I didn't have all the details yet, but I knew that if I could bring down John, I could destroy him in a way he would never see coming. And once he was out of the picture, my wife would have nowhere to turn. But I couldn't rush things. I needed patience. I needed precision. I was playing a dangerous game, and I had to stay calm, cool, and collected. I couldn't afford any mistakes. Not when I was this close. The next phase of my plan would be even more delicate. I needed to get to the heart of John's operation, find the right leverage to ensure his complete downfall. It was time to take the next step. As I gathered more information about John and his illicit activities, I knew that the key to my revenge lay in his hubris. He had become too confident, too comfortable in his world of crime. He thought he was untouchable, that his connections would protect him from anything. And that, I realized, was where I had an advantage. People like him, people who live on the edge, often make one crucial mistake: they underestimate those they think they can control. I didn't just want to expose John for the criminal he was. That would be easy. What I wanted was to shatter his world entirely, to make him feel the weight of his own arrogance. I wasn't going to just bring him down, I was going to destroy everything he thought he knew about power. I was going to make him feel small, weak, and insignificant. It was time to take the next step. I had to get closer to him, make him trust me. And the only way to do that was to make him think I was a valuable ally, someone who could help him expand his empire. I had to play the part of the ambitious entrepreneur, someone who could offer him something he wanted. I spent days putting together a plan. I crafted an elaborate persona, a wealthy investor who had recently become interested in expanding into the club scene. I knew just enough about the business to seem credible. My research had given me enough information to approach him with a tempting offer. A partnership. I'd offer to help him expand his operations, bring in more revenue, and take his nightclub to the next level. I knew that John, with his arrogance, would see me as a means to further his own ambitions. He wouldn't think twice about working with me. And I would use that to my advantage. I spent hours perfecting my story. I made sure I knew every detail about his club, his competitors, the financial aspects of the business. I needed to sound like I belonged in his world, not like some outsider trying to get in. I rented a luxurious car, dressed in an expensive suit, and planned my approach. I knew it was risky. If he sensed any hint of deception, it would all be over. But I wasn't afraid. If I was going to make him pay, I had to take risks. The meeting took place at his club. He had arranged it for late in the evening, after hours, when the club was empty, and only a few of his trusted associates remained. I walked in like I owned the place, my confidence radiating as I made my way to the VIP area where he was waiting. John was standing by the bar, talking to a few people. When he saw me, his face lit up with recognition. He extended his hand, greeting me with a wide, charming smile. "Glad you could make it," he said, his voice smooth. "I've heard a lot of good things about you." I shook his hand firmly, forcing myself to smile. "The pleasure's mine. I've been looking forward to this." We sat down at a private table, and I wasted no time getting to the point. I outlined my plan, how I could help him expand his club's operations, increase its profits, and take it to new heights. I spoke with authority, carefully choosing my words to make him feel like he was making a great decision. I knew how to manipulate people. I had learned that over the years, both in business and in life. As I spoke, I watched him closely. He was clearly intrigued, his interest piqued. He leaned forward, nodding as I laid out the details. He didn't seem to question me, didn't seem to see through the facade. He was too eager to believe that someone like me could help him grow his empire. "You've got the right idea," he said after a long pause. "I like your vision. I think we could make a lot of money together. You've got a deal." I kept my expression neutral, hiding the satisfaction that was bubbling up inside me. He was falling for it, hook, line, and sinker. He trusted me now, and that was exactly what I needed. We discussed the specifics of the deal, what I would bring to the table, the resources I had access to, and how we could structure the partnership. The more I spoke, the more I realized just how vulnerable John was. He had built his empire on deceit, on shady dealings, but he had never really questioned how secure it all was. He thought he was untouchable. By the end of the night, we had shaken hands on the deal. John was convinced that I was going to be his ticket to greater wealth and power. He trusted me now. He thought he was in control. But he didn't know that I was already planning his downfall. I knew the next steps wouldn't be easy. I had to play my part perfectly, build on the trust one had gained, and make sure I was always one step ahead. John was too blinded by his own ambition to see that he had just made a dangerous mistake. In the coming weeks, I would begin to sow the seeds of his destruction. I would gather the evidence I needed to expose him for the criminal he was. And I would use that leverage to make him pay for what he had done. But I couldn't rush things. I needed to bide my time, wait for the perfect moment to strike. And when that moment came, I would make sure that everything he had worked for, the empire he thought was invincible, came crashing down. As the days went on, I played my role with precision, carefully maintaining the persona I had created. John was completely in the dark about my true intentions, and I was gaining more and more access to his world. It felt almost too easy. He was eager to share his plans for expanding the club, trusting me as a partner in ways I hadn't expected. I could see the glint of excitement in his eyes whenever we met, the way he spoke about his empire like it was his kingdom, and I, his most trusted ally. He was blind to the fact that I was setting the stage for his destruction. I took every opportunity to gather more information, learning about the club's finances, its connections, and, most importantly, the illegal activities that John had been involved in for years. I knew exactly where to look. His club was more than just a place to drink and dance, it was the front for a much larger, more dangerous network. John was laundering money through a series of shell companies, evading taxes, and dealing with underworld figures who made their money in the most sordid ways imaginable. But it wasn't just about the money. I knew if I played this right, I could expose him for the criminal mastermind he truly was. One evening, John invited me to a private meeting at his club, a more intimate affair, just the two of us and a few of his closest associates. He had started to confide in me more and more, showing me the inner workings of his empire as if I were a trusted friend. It was during this meeting that I realized how deep the web went. The people he surrounded himself with were more dangerous than I had anticipated, violent, ruthless individuals with connections to organized crime syndicates. They spoke in hushed tones, discussing deals that were completely illegal, but John acted like he was untouchable, like he had nothing to fear. That night, I took careful note of everything I heard. I made mental notes of names, locations, and key pieces of information that would later become crucial. As we parted ways, John slapped me on the back, congratulating me on the deal we were making. He had no idea that I was closer than ever to bringing everything crashing down. Over the next few weeks, I continued to build the trust between us, all the while gathering evidence of John's criminal activities. It wasn't difficult. He was careless, overconfident, and his own associates were beginning to lose faith in him. He thought he was in control, but I could see the cracks starting to form. People were whispering behind his back, his operations were slipping through his fingers, and I was slowly becoming the one he relied on. But I couldn't be content with just gathering information. I needed to make sure that the evidence I was collecting would be enough to not only bring him down but also take down everyone connected to him. I knew that to truly hurt him, I would need to involve the authorities. But that would require more than just hearsay. I needed undeniable proof. And so, I began to dig deeper. I arranged to meet one of John's business associates, a man who had been dealing with him for years. I knew he wasn't loyal, he was just in it for the money. With the right amount of pressure, I was sure I could convince him to turn on John. I set up a meeting at a cafe on the outskirts of town. The place was quiet, almost empty, and I chose a table near the back, away from prying eyes. When the man arrived, I could see the anxiety in his eyes. He knew something was off, but he didn't yet know what I had in store. "I don't know if this is a good idea," he said, looking around nervously before sitting down. He was sweating, his hands fidgeting as he pushed his coffee cup back and forth on the table. "You don't have a choice," I replied, keeping my tone calm, collected. "You've been working with John for years. You know what he's been doing. The question is, how long do you think you can keep getting away with it?" The man shifted uncomfortably, his eyes darting around the room. "I don't know what you mean." I smiled, leaning in closer. "You've been laundering money through the club, running drugs through his supply chain. You've been getting paid handsomely for it, haven't you?" I watched his face fall, the color draining from his cheeks. "I don't know anything about that," he said quickly, but I could see the guilt written all over his face. "You don't have to lie to me," I said, my voice low but firm. "We both know what's been going on. But here's the thing, you've been playing both sides. You've been dealing with some people who would happily see you disappear if it came to it. If you want to avoid that, I'm willing to help you." His eyes widened in panic, but I could see the wheels turning in his head. "What do you want from me?" "I want the truth," I said, my gaze hardening. "I want you to help me take down John. If you cooperate, I'll make sure you're protected. If you don't, well, let's just say I have a way of making people disappear." The man swallowed hard, his voice trembling. Okay, I'll help you. Just don't hurt me." I smiled, the satisfaction of knowing I was one step closer to my goal filling me with cold triumph. "Good choice." The information he provided was crucial, details about John's money laundering operations, the key players involved, and even evidence of illegal transactions. I now had everything I needed to bring him down. The only thing left was timing. I knew I had to be careful. One wrong move, and everything would fall apart. But as I walked away from that meeting, I felt the weight of victory pressing down on me. The next phase was already in motion. The walls were closing in around John, and soon, he would have nowhere to hide. The pieces were finally falling into place. I had gathered enough evidence to expose John's criminal empire, and I knew exactly when and how to make my move. But despite my confidence, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease that had settled deep in my chest. I was about to take down a man who had been living in the shadows for years, and that meant I had to be prepared for anything. The plan was simple. I would use the information I had gathered to alert the authorities, but I would make sure that John never saw it coming. I knew he was arrogant, too comfortable in his power, but he wasn't stupid. He would try to cover his tracks the moment he realized someone was after him. I couldn't give him that chance. The first step was to set up a meeting with the right people. I couldn't just call the police and drop everything in their lap. That would be too easy, too predictable. No, I needed to get the attention of the right officials, those who would listen to me and take action. Through my connections, I was able to reach out to a few trusted contacts within law enforcement, people who had dealt with John's type before. They understood the game. They knew how to handle criminals like him. I arranged a discreet meeting in a small, inconspicuous cafe on the edge of town. No one would think twice about it. The officers I had contacted were discreet, their faces familiar but not well known. We exchanged pleasantries, but the conversation quickly turned to business. I laid out everything I had learned about John, his illegal activities, his ties to organized crime, the shell companies, the money laundering, the drug trafficking. I showed them the proof I had collected, the records, the transcripts of phone conversations, and the names of his associates. I could see the shock in their eyes, but there was no time for hesitation. They understood the gravity of the situation. "This is bigger than we thought," one of the officers said, his voice low as he reviewed the evidence. "We've been tracking his operations for months, but this changes everything." "We can take him down," I said, my voice steady, determined. "But it has to be done carefully. He's too powerful to make a move without covering his tracks. He'll try to run." The officers nodded in agreement. "We'll handle it from here. But you need to step back. If John suspects you're involved, you could be in danger." I understood the warning, but I couldn't help feeling a sense of satisfaction. I had done it. I had maneuvered everything into position, and now it was time to watch it all unravel. That night, I received a text from John. It was short and to the point, a simple invitation to meet at the club. "We need to talk about the next steps. Come by tonight." The message was casual, but I knew it was his way of asserting control, of reminding me that he was still in charge. What he didn't know was that tonight would be the last time he felt in control of anything. I dressed carefully, sharp suit, crisp shirt, and made my way to the club. I felt a sense of detachment as I entered, almost as though I was stepping into a world that no longer had any hold on me. John was waiting for me in his usual spot, leaning against the bar, his confident smile plastered across his face as if nothing could touch him. He stood up when he saw me, his eyes gleaming with the excitement of a man who thought he had everything figured out. "I'm glad you could make it," he said, clapping me on the back. "I think we're on the verge of something big." I smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "I'm sure we are," I replied, my voice calm, almost distant. We sat down at a private table, and I let him speak first. He rambled on about the expansion plans, about his future in the business. It was the same talk he had been giving me for weeks, but now I couldn't listen to it. All I could think about was the takedown that was already in motion, the officers who were waiting for the signal to swoop in. I had to keep him talking, keep him distracted, until it was too late for him to run. "You've done a great job, really," I said, leaning back in my chair, trying to sound impressed. "But I've been thinking, there might be a few more things we could do to solidify the deal. I think we need to take a more aggressive approach. The money is there, but we need to expand our operations." John raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "What do you mean?" "I've got a few ideas. But they'll require more resources, I said, dropping the hint that I was ready to invest even more in his operation. I knew it would appeal to his greed. He was too focused on the idea of wealth and power to see that I was playing him. His eyes narrowed as he leaned in. What kind of resources? I leaned forward too, my voice lowering as if I were sharing a secret. I know people. Powerful people. They can help us expand faster than we ever imagined. We'll be untouchable. He was listening now, completely hooked. I could see the wheels turning in his head. But I wasn't done yet. You'll need to make sure your operations stay under the radar, though, I continued. There's a lot of heat coming down from law enforcement, and they've been sniffing around for months. You don't want to get caught in a sting. John's face faltered for just a second, but then he shrugged it off. I'm not worried. I've been in this business long enough to know how to stay safe. I leaned back in my chair, watching him carefully. I wouldn't be so sure, I said quietly. Suddenly, the lights of the club flickered. The music cut out. A few people screamed in surprise, but I could see the confusion on John's face as he stood up, looking around. And then, in the dead silence that followed, I heard it, the unmistakable sound of sirens. John's face drained of color as he looked at me. What the hell is going on? Before he could react, the doors to the club burst open, and a team of officers stormed in, guns drawn. The look on John's face was pure disbelief as they moved quickly to arrest him. I stood up slowly, watching as they handcuffed him. He tried to resist, but it was futile. His empire was crumbling around him, and he was too blinded by his own arrogance to realize it until it was too late. As he was dragged away, I felt a twisted sense of satisfaction. This was it. The moment of my revenge. He had no one to blame but himself. But what he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I was the one who had orchestrated his downfall. And as the sirens grew distant, I couldn't help but smile. I had won. The next few days were a blur. The arrest of John, and the entire operation he had built, made headlines. The club was shut down, its assets seized, and the authorities moved swiftly to dismantle his network. The sting was successful, and John, once a powerful figure in the underground world, was now facing a mountain of charges. Money laundering, drug trafficking, extortion, his empire, which had been built on corruption and lies, was finally crumbling. But while the world around me watched in awe as John's downfall unfolded, I felt strangely detached. The satisfaction of revenge that I had expected to feel was absent. Instead, there was only an unsettling emptiness. I had achieved what I set out to do, but the victory didn't taste as sweet as I thought it would. I didn't speak to my wife immediately. I had been waiting for this moment, hoping that when she found out what had happened to John, she would finally understand the magnitude of her betrayal. But the truth was, I didn't know what to say to her anymore. I had spent so long planning my revenge, so focused on bringing him down, that I hadn't fully considered what it would mean for her. For us. When I finally did speak to her, it wasn't through words. It was through the cold silence between us. She had been trying to reach me, leaving messages, calling, but I ignored them. I couldn't look at her. Not after everything that had happened. She came home one night, her eyes red and puffy from crying. She knew everything. She knew that John had been arrested, and she knew that I had somehow been involved. It was in the news. Everyone was talking about it. I don't know what to say, she said, her voice trembling as she stood in the doorway. She had been crying for hours, but her face was still a mask of disbelief. She looked at me as if she expected some kind of explanation, but I wasn't sure I had one to give. You don't need to say anything, I replied, my voice flat. You've already said enough. Her face crumpled, and she stepped toward me, as if trying to bridge the distance that had grown between us. But I couldn't bring myself to touch her, not after everything that had happened. I'm sorry, she whispered. I made a mistake. I never meant for things to get so out of control. I looked at her then, really looked at her, and for the first time, I didn't see the woman I had married. I saw someone else, someone who had betrayed me in ways I couldn't even begin to comprehend. The pain of it washed over me again, sharper this time. "I don't want your apology," I said quietly, my heart pounding in my chest. "It's too late for that." She stepped back, her eyes wide with hurt, but I didn't care. She had made her choice. She had chosen him over me, and now, she would have to live with the consequences. She stood there for a long time, her face contorting as if she were trying to figure out what to say next. But nothing came. Finally, she turned and left the room, leaving me standing there, feeling more alone than I had ever felt in my life. The silence in the house was deafening after she left. I could still hear her voice in my head, repeating her apologies, her promises. But I knew they meant nothing now. What was done was done. There was no going back. In the days that followed, I couldn't escape the sense of emptiness that had settled in my chest. I had gotten my revenge, yes. But at what cost? I had destroyed the man who had taken what was mine, but in doing so, I had destroyed the woman I loved as well. It was a bitter pill to swallow, and I wasn't sure I could choke it down. I tried to move on. I buried myself in work, tried to focus on the things that used to matter to me before all of this had started. But nothing felt the same. The world I had built, the life I had once been so proud of, had crumbled around me. The trust one had placed in my wife, in John, in everything I had worked for, was shattered. And the worst part? The worst part was that I didn't even know who I was anymore. I had become a man consumed by revenge, a man who had sacrificed everything for a fleeting sense of justice. And now, standing in the ruins of what had once been my life, I wondered if it had all been worth it. One night, a week after John's arrest, I received a message from her. It was short, almost like a last-ditch attempt at something, but I could feel the weight behind it. "I'm leaving," she wrote. "I don't know what's left for us. I never thought it would come to this. But I need to go." I stared at the words for a long time, feeling nothing but a hollow ache in my chest. There was no anger left to feel. No rage. Only an overwhelming sense of loss. I didn't reply. I didn't have to. I knew what was coming. And deep down, I knew that she was right to leave. Because what was left between us? Nothing. She had betrayed me, and I had taken everything from her. Our love, our trust, there was no fixing what had been broken. The next morning, she was gone. She had packed her things in the dead of night and slipped away without a word. I didn't chase her. I didn't try to stop her. I just let her go. Days turned into weeks, and life continued its slow march forward, but I remained stuck in the wreckage of my own creation. John was in jail, his empire reduced to ashes, and my wife was gone, vanished without a trace. I had gotten what I wanted, or at least what I thought I wanted. The triumph of revenge that I had envisioned so vividly now felt empty, hollow, like a ghost of something that once had meaning. I found myself waking up in the same bed every day, but it wasn't the same bed anymore. The house that had once felt like home was now a tomb of memories. The air seemed heavy, suffocating. Her absence filled the rooms with a silence I couldn't escape, and it felt as though every corner of the house was haunted by the ghosts of what could have been. I couldn't walk through the living room without seeing her there, sitting on the couch, reading a book, laughing at something I'd said. I couldn't stand in the kitchen without imagining her cooking, the smell of dinner wafting through the air. It wasn't the house that had changed, it was me. I had let it all slip through my fingers, and now I was paying the price. I tried to throw myself into my work. I thought it would help distract me, keep my mind from wandering back to the ruins of my personal life. But nothing seemed to matter anymore. Every deal, every project, felt like a hollow exercise in futility. I was surrounded by people, yet I had never felt more alone. I realized, far too late, that the life I had been living had been built on fragile foundations. Trust, loyalty, love, they were all so easily shattered. I thought about reaching out to her, calling her, telling her that I had changed, that I was sorry. But I knew deep down that it wouldn't matter. There was no going back. I had burned all the bridges, and now I was stranded on an island of my own making. She had been the one thing I held on to, the one person I had trusted, and I had destroyed that trust in pursuit of revenge. There was no undoing what had been done. At night, I would lie awake in the dark, staring at the ceiling, thinking about what came next. What did I have left now? What was the point of it all? Revenge had consumed me, hollowed me out, and in the end, I was no better than the man I had sought to destroy. John's arrest had been satisfying at first, but now it felt meaningless. What had I really accomplished? I had taken down a man, yes, but in doing so, I had lost everything I had cared about. My wife, my integrity, my peace of mind, they were all gone. And as much as I tried to ignore it, I knew the truth, I had lost a part of myself along the way. The person I had been before the betrayal, before the lies and the deceit, was slipping further and further away. All I had left was the version of me that had become obsessed with revenge, the version of me that had been willing to destroy everything to get even. One night, I decided to go to the club. The one where it had all started. John's former club was now a shell of its former self, closed off, its doors locked. I stood outside, staring at the place, trying to reconcile the memories of what it had been with what it had become. The flashing lights, the music, the laughter, it was all gone now. The people who had once flocked there for a night of fun were long gone, and in its place was a dark, empty building, abandoned and forgotten. I could feel the weight of it all. The years of my life that had been wasted in pursuit of the wrong things. The lies, the deceit, the manipulations, it had all led me here, to this moment, staring at the remnants of a life I thought I wanted. But it wasn't the life I had wanted. It was the life I had created out of anger, out of revenge. And now, I was left to pick up the pieces, alone. I didn't know what to do next. Part of me still wanted to make things right with her, to somehow fix the mess I had made. But the other part of me, the part that had orchestrated all of this, knew that it was too late. She was gone. I was alone. And there was no going back. The next few days were a blur of numbness and regret. I moved through life like a ghost, going through the motions but never truly living. I kept telling myself that I had made the right choice, that I had done what needed to be done. But the emptiness inside me only deepened, the more I tried to convince myself otherwise. Then, one afternoon, I got a call. It was from one of my old colleagues, someone I hadn't spoken to in months. His voice was tight, urgent. "Listen, I don't know if you know this, but things are heating up around here. John's lawyers are pushing hard. They've got dirt on you. I don't know how, but they're coming after you, too. You need to be careful." I felt the blood drain from my face. "What are you talking about?" I demanded, but I could already feel the panic rising in my chest. "They've got a file on you, on everything you've been involved in. They're trying to link you to the whole operation. If you don't do something, they'll drag you down with him." I froze, the weight of his words sinking in. I had thought I was untouchable. I had thought I could orchestrate everything without consequences. But I was wrong. Now, I was caught in a web of my own making, and there was no way out. The ghosts of my past had finally come to claim me. The call from my colleague echoed in my mind for hours after I hung up. The sense of dread that had been lingering in the back of my mind now took root, growing deeper and more suffocating with each passing moment. I had thought that my revenge against John had settled everything. I had believed that I would walk away victorious, leaving the wreckage of his life behind me as a reminder of the price he paid for betraying me. But now, as I stood at the precipice of my own undoing, I realized that I had made a fatal miscalculation. John had been playing a much larger game than I had ever realized. The criminal empire he ran was a well-oiled machine, and no matter how much I had chipped away at it, there were always going to be more pieces to the puzzle. I had underestimated the extent of his reach, and now, his lawyers were circling, looking for any crack they could exploit. They had dirt on me. They had the evidence they needed to destroy me. I couldn't help but feel a sickening sense of déjà vu as I paced around my apartment, my mind racing. I had spent so much time focusing on destroying John that I hadn't once stopped to think about the consequences for myself. I had always told myself that I was above the messiness of it all, that I could play the game without getting caught in the crossfire. But now, it seemed as though I was just as much a part of the wreckage as he was. I had to act fast. I spent the next few days on edge, trying to figure out how to handle the situation. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that the only way out was to go on the offensive. I couldn't let John's lawyers have the upper hand. I had to gather everything I could on them, on him, and use it to my advantage. But I couldn't do it alone. I needed help. I reached out to an old acquaintance, a private investigator I had worked with years ago. He was discreet, resourceful, and had connections that could dig up information others couldn't. I had no time to waste. If I was going to survive this, I needed him to dig into John's legal team, find any weaknesses I could exploit. The PI agreed to help, and within hours, he was off gathering intel. As I waited for his report, I did the only thing I could. I tried to cover my tracks. I erased every trace of my involvement with John, deleted any emails, phone calls, or records that might tie me to the illegal activities he had been running. But it felt like a losing battle. Every time I thought I had wiped something clean, another piece of evidence surfaced in my mind. I couldn't escape the guilt of my own actions. I had knowingly walked down this path, had orchestrated the events that had led to John's downfall. But now that it was turning back on me, I wasn't sure I could handle the fallout. The days blurred together as I waited for the private investigator to come back with answers. But the more time passed, the more I began to feel the walls closing in around me. Every knock on the door sent my heart racing, every unfamiliar number that appeared on my phone screen made my pulse spike. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me, waiting for the right moment to strike. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the PI called me back. His voice was low, almost conspiratorial. "I've got something," he said. "John's lawyers, there's a file, a big one. They've got everything they need to go after you. But here's the thing, they don't know the full extent of what you've done. They're fishing for anything that can link you to his operation, but they haven't found the smoking gun. Yet." I exhaled, a wave of relief washing over me for a brief moment. But it was short-lived. "But here's the kicker," the PI continued, his voice turning grim. "There's a bigger player involved in all of this, someone high up, someone with resources that make John's empire look small in comparison. It's not just about John anymore. This is about power. And that's who's been pulling the strings behind the scenes." I felt my blood run cold. "Who?" I asked, barely able to keep the panic from creeping into my voice. "I don't know yet," he replied. "But the clues are there. You're not just a target because of John. You're in the middle of something much bigger. If you don't act fast, it could all come crashing down. And this time, you won't be able to run." My mind spun as I processed his words. It was like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. I had thought that John was the endgame, the final piece in the puzzle. But now it seemed like I had merely uncovered the surface of something much darker, something far more dangerous than I could have ever imagined. I was no longer just trying to escape the consequences of my own actions. I was in the crosshairs of people far more powerful than I had ever realized. And no matter how carefully I had planned my revenge against John, I had never been prepared for this. The private investigator promised to dig deeper, to find out who the real player was behind the scenes. But I knew that time was running out. I couldn't wait for him to come back with answers. If I wanted to survive this, I needed to take control. I had to find the source of this power, the puppet master who had been pulling all the strings, and deal with them before they dealt with me. As I hung up the phone, a chill ran through me. I was in deeper than I'd ever been, and I had no idea how to claw my way out. But I knew one thing: this wasn't just about revenge anymore. This was about survival. Days stretched on, and the web of uncertainty around me grew ever tighter. My mind raced, trying to keep up with the rapidly unfolding situation. I had started this journey seeking retribution against John, but now it seemed like I had opened Pandora's box. Every step I took felt like I was walking on the edge of a cliff, not knowing if the next gust of wind would send me tumbling into the abyss. The private investigator continued his work, but he had little to go on. He could sense the danger as well. The deeper he dug, the more the shadows seemed to lengthen, swallowing every lead he chased. It became clear to me that the game had shifted. I wasn't just a man avenging a betrayal anymore. I was a pawn caught in the machinations of a much larger, more powerful force, one that had been lurking in the shadows for far longer than I could have ever anticipated. In my desperate search for answers, I revisited everything that had led me to this point. The club. The meetings with John. My wife's affair. All the events that had seemed like disconnected pieces of a puzzle now felt like a carefully orchestrated series of steps in a much larger scheme. Someone had set the stage for me to walk down this path, and I had been too blind to see it. I wasn't just a victim of betrayal, I was being played. I spent nights alone in my apartment, combing through documents, making connections, and re-examining every detail. It was maddening. But then, one piece of information stood out. One clue that connected the dots. I found a name. It was buried deep in one of the files the private investigator had uncovered. A name that kept popping up in relation to John's business dealings, his illegal activities, and even the shady figures that surrounded him. The name was unfamiliar to me, but there was something about it that felt like a thread I needed to pull on. So, I did. The name was Victor Graves. I didn't know who he was, but the more I dug, the more I realized that Victor Graves wasn't just some criminal mastermind. He was connected to high-level corruption, politicians, law enforcement officials, and businessmen whose names were whispered in the most exclusive circles. He was the puppet master, the man who had been pulling John's strings from the very beginning. John had been nothing more than a pawn in a much larger game, and I had been a pawn in his game. I couldn't breathe. The realization hit me with full force. Victor Graves was untouchable, a man whose power stretched far beyond the underworld. He had created the perfect smokescreen with John, keeping himself hidden in the shadows while John acted as the face of the operation. Now, as I pieced it together, I understood that everything, my wife's affair, John's business, my involvement in it all, had been set in motion by Graves. He was the one who had made sure I would take the bait. And now, I was caught in the trap, with no clear way out. I had no choice but to confront him. I couldn't run anymore. The past had come back to haunt me, and the only way to survive was to face the source of the power that had orchestrated my downfall. I made the decision to go to him. I had no idea where to find Victor Graves. He didn't leave a trail, didn't leave footprints for anyone to follow. But I had learned enough from the people who had dealt with him to understand that he was a man who lived in plain sight. He wasn't interested in hiding. He thrived on being untouchable, on being the unseen force that controlled everything from the shadows. I knew I had to be careful. I couldn't walk into this situation blindly. But I was desperate. The walls were closing in, and I could feel the pressure mounting. I had to confront Graves on my terms, or I would be swallowed whole by the web he had created. I reached out to a few trusted contacts who might have information about Graves, individuals who had worked with him or heard whispers of his operations. Most of them were too scared to speak, afraid that their lives would be forfeit if they crossed him. But there was one person, a man named Jace, an ex-employee of Graves who had narrowly escaped the man's wrath years ago, who agreed to meet with me. We arranged to meet at an old diner on the outskirts of the city. It was a place I knew would be safe, isolated, with no prying eyes. When Jace arrived, he was a different man than I remembered. He was skittish, glancing over his shoulder as if expecting someone to jump out of the shadows at any moment. He was trembling, visibly shaken, and the fear in his eyes was palpable. "You have no idea what you're getting into," he said, his voice low and urgent. "Victor Graves is not a man you confront. He's untouchable, and he's got people everywhere. It's not just the police. It's politicians, lawyers, businessmen, he owns them all." I leaned in closer, trying to steady my breath. "I'm not here to run. I need to know how to find him. I need to confront him." Jace looked at me, his face a mix of disbelief and pity. "You think you can take him down? You can't." I tried. I tried to walk away from him, and he made sure I'd never escape. "You're already in too deep. If you go after him, you'll be dead before you even get close." I knew what he was saying was true. I knew that Graves was not just some criminal to be toppled easily. But I had no other choice. I had to confront the monster, even if it meant risking everything. "I have to do this," I said, my voice resolute. "I don't have a choice anymore. I need to know where to find him." Jay sighed, rubbing his temples as if the weight of the decision was too much to bear. Finally, he spoke. "Graves is always 2 steps ahead. But there's one place where he meets with his closest associates. It's a place no one would think to look, a place that's always off the grid. It's an old warehouse, on the edge of the docks. But be careful, man. If he's involved, it's a trap. He's been playing this game for far longer than you realize." It felt like the last piece of the puzzle had fallen into place. The warehouse. The edge of the docks. I didn't know what I was walking into, but I couldn't back down now. If I was going to end this nightmare, I had to face Victor Graves, and I had to do it on my own terms. The night felt heavy with anticipation as I stood in front of the old warehouse by the docks, the faint scent of saltwater and rust clinging to the air. The fog rolled in from the ocean, thick and suffocating, making it hard to see more than a few feet in front of me. But I didn't need to see clearly. I knew what I was walking into. I had been led here by a series of choices, by my own hunger for revenge, and now, it had all culminated in this moment. The confrontation with Victor Graves. The dim light from the single bulb hanging above the warehouse door barely illuminated the surroundings. I glanced over my shoulder, making sure no one was following me, before I stepped forward and pushed open the heavy door. The creak of it echoed in the silence, but the sound felt almost insignificant against the weight pressing down on my chest. Inside, the warehouse was cavernous, its walls lined with shadows and the remnants of old machinery long abandoned. The only sounds were the echo of my footsteps and the faint rustle of something far in the back of the room. I hesitated for a moment, trying to steady my breath, then continued forward. And then, I saw him. Victor Graves stood by the far wall, leaning against a stack of crates, his posture relaxed, almost bored. He didn't move as I approached, didn't flinch when the door slammed shut behind me. He had been expecting me. It was almost as if this moment had been rehearsed. "Did you really think you could bring me down?" Graves asked, his voice smooth, cold, and dripping with disdain. His eyes narrowed as he studied me, the faintest smile playing at the corners of his lips. I swallowed the lump in my throat. I had come here with one purpose, to end this. To confront the man who had manipulated everything, the man who had led me to ruin. But even now, facing him in the flesh, I felt the weight of his power. He was a master of control, a puppet master who had orchestrated every step of this twisted game. And I had played right into his hands. "I didn't come here to ask permission," I said, trying to steady my voice. "I came here to end this. You've ruined my life, Graves. And I'm going to make you pay for it. Graves chuckled darkly, pushing himself off the crates and straightening to his full height. He was tall, his presence imposing, but there was something more dangerous about him than just his size. It was the confidence, the control. The way he moved, as if he knew the outcome before the game even began. You think you've got control here? You don't, he said, taking a step toward me. You're in my world now. You always have been. And everything you've done, every move you've made, has been because I allowed it. I bristled at his words, but I didn't back down. This was it. The moment I had spent so long waiting for. He was the one who had put all of this in motion, the one who had made sure my every step was calculated. He had ruined my marriage, manipulated me, used me as a pawn in his sick game. I don't care what you think, I said, the anger swelling in my chest. I'm done being your pawn. I've taken down your empire. I've destroyed everything you've built, and now, I'm going to make sure you never hurt anyone again. Graves raised an eyebrow, his amusement barely contained. Is that so? You've done nothing but dig yourself deeper into a hole you'll never climb out of. You can't win, not against me. And you certainly can't win by yourself. I felt the blood drain from my face as he spoke. He was right. I had been alone in this fight. But I wasn't about to let him see me falter. I had come too far. What happens next? I asked, my voice steady. You think you can just walk away from everything you've done? Victor smiled then, a slow, predatory grin. What happens next is that you make a choice. You can walk out of here and disappear, let the authorities handle the mess I've left behind. Or you can stay, and I'll make sure your life is over. No one's untouchable, not even you. The weight of his words pressed down on me. There it was. The offer. He was trying to control me, trying to make me believe I had no choice but to walk away. But deep down, I knew that if I walked away now, if I let him go, it would be my own defeat. I would never have peace. And this nightmare would never end. I reached into my jacket and pulled out the evidence I had gathered. The documents, the recordings, everything that linked him to the criminal underworld, the connections to corrupt politicians, and the deals that had gone unnoticed for years. I had done what I needed to do. It was time to end this, once and for all. I'm not walking away, I said, my voice low but filled with finality. You're done. I've got everything I need to bring you down. You've been playing your game for too long, but it's over now. Graves' expression darkened. The amusement vanished, replaced by the cold, calculating look of a man who knew that things were slipping out of his control. But even then, I could see the flicker of something in his eyes, something dangerous, something desperate. He was cornered. You think the law is going to save you, he sneered. They'll be too scared to touch me. I've got people everywhere. You don't know what you're up against. The room seemed to close in as I stepped forward, the weight of the situation pressing down on me. For a moment, time seemed to stretch, as if the world itself was holding its breath. I'm not afraid of you, I said, the words leaving my mouth with more confidence than I felt. And neither are they. In that instant, the door to the warehouse swung open. A dozen officers, armed and ready, flooded the room, surrounding Graves with swift precision. The realization hit him at the same time the handcuffs clicked into place. You're done, I said again, my voice steady, even as I felt the rush of adrenaline course through my veins. Graves didn't speak as they led him away, his once imposing figure now reduced to something pathetic. His empire, his power, all of it was gone in an instant. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I could breathe again. As the officers took him away, I stood there, the weight of everything I had lost and gained settling in. I had taken down the man who had destroyed my life. But as I looked at the mess that remained in the wake of it all, I couldn't help but wonder if it had all been worth it. The pieces were scattered. The wreckage was real. And though the game was over, the scars remained.